And welcome back
Welcome back.
to another Rep podcast.
I feel like we have the power of God
And anime
on our side.
on our side. If you could have the power of any anime, what anime would it be?
Ooh.
Are you a big anime fan? Like, do you watch anime at all?
I'm starting to get into it. Giorgio, you remember Giorgio?
Mm-hmm.
He told me to watch Attack on Titan. And like, I'm not a huge anime fan. I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z and
That's anime?
yeah, but that was like one of the only ones that I followed aside from Hellsing. I loved Hellsing, but I wasn't like part of the anime craze. I find myself watching.
It's not a craze,
more,
it's a lifestyle.
Sorry, lifestyle.
Rude.
I find myself watching more anime now than I did before. And so I started Attack on Titan, I think Saturday, and season 1 has about 22, 24 episodes. I'm already on episode 19.
Yeah.
So
Attack on Titan's a cool one.
I'm pretty hooked.
I really like it. I'm almost done with season 4.
So I was told it's very Game of Thrones like, in the sense that no character is safe and the story is epic and there's always character building.
Yes.
I was very well surprised 4 episodes in on how accurate no character safe actually was.
Oh, and that permeates through
Oh yeah,
the entire time.
so now like
For the most part.
so now when something happens to a character, I'm like, at first I'm like, what? But then I'm like, makes sense, and then I move on. Like, yeah.
You're only in season 1, so I have to be careful. I'm not gonna tell you. I'm not gonna
Please don't
spoil anything. But there are, like, just like Game of Thrones, that's very evident pretty early on when you're like, oh, these are the main characters. Like, this is where the story is going to be revolving around, or who this is going to be revolving around. So you'll eventually realize who's going to stick.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's a large hit and miss.
I'm really hoping the romantic side of Eren and Mikasa's relationship evolves. Don't ruin it for me. I don't know. I don't want to know yet. Maybe someone dies. I don't know. But like, there's where I'm at now. It's just like, I've fallen in love with the story of the two, and I hope it blossoms. But I'm also won't be surprised if somebody gets splatted like a bug in season 2. So yeah.
Yeah, I can't say anything.
If you're not a big anime fan, but you do like stuff like Game of Thrones, I recommend giving Attack on Titan.
The fair warning about Attack on Titan is it's very gory.
It's very, for anime, it's gory. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think even for kind of like the lay person who doesn't like watch a lot of anime
or gore,
but it's definitely I just got a message from Marissa that just goes, "There's a raccoon in my mom's bedroom."
Yes.
Or bathroom.
Yes.
Cool.
The Woody Show would call that raccoon news.
Raccoon news. Jesus. But Attack on Titan is effectively like dystopian future. Cities have been like relegated to these like giant walled off like civilizations.
Yeah.
Because on the outsides of the wall are Titans, which are giant
humanoids.
Humanoid-esque beings that eat people.
I have so many questions about that too. And I've been told that it develops as to who they are, what they are.
Yeah, you'll eventually learn like where the Titans come from.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say on that.
I already have so many questions about Eren. Well, for those listening who haven't watched, I don't want to spoil the first season either, but like Eren's character, when it becomes clear what happens, I was blown away, and I'm like, I mean, it's going to build obviously because they keep talking about it, but like I'm stuck in the point where I'm like, can we hurry up and get to that? Because I want to know more about that.
Yeah. All will be told in time.
In good time.
It's fun. Yeah. Someone was asking me about like anime because they overheard me talking to one of my clients about it because we do like weekly recaps because she watches anime.
Yeah.
And she's like, "What are you watching now?" Yeah. Again, she just started watching Attack on Titan. And they're always like, someone at the gym was like, well, what's the difference between like anime and cartoons? I was like, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's just Japanese cartoons.
Yeah.
I'm like, they're usually adopted from manga, which is just a comic book.
Also, like, I don't know. I started watching it in English. I know there is the original audio version with English subtitles. I think it's just easier for me to follow in English. Mm-hmm. I may pick up the next anime with original audio and then English subtitles, because that's how I like watching Dragon Ball Z now. It was with the Japanese and the English subtitles.
Hard pass.
Hard pass?
Yeah. Well, I like, because it's similar to what you're saying. Like I grew up watching it on like Cartoon Network.
Yeah.
On like the Toonami, and so that I'm used to those voices.
Yeah.
And so like the Japanese voices are so different that it's like it's hard to pay attention to. But there's certain ones you can totally do it for.
Yeah.
Like Dragon Ball Z is one you could easily watch in Japanese dub.
Yeah.
With like English subtitles, because like visually there's not a whole lot going on.
Right.
Attack on Titan, on the other hand, there's a lot going on.
So much story.
And it's kind of like hard to like read, and I found it was hard to read and watch.
Agreed.
And be able to like take in both. It's I was kind of either paying attention to what was being shown, or I was paying attention to like what they were saying and the storyline behind it. So I just relegated myself to watching it in English.
That makes sense. I'll give my next anime a shot and see what I think. Like, because I have the same problem too. Like, I'd rather watch than read.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Speaking of reading,
I read good.
We're gonna talk about reading, specifically
Reading Rainbow.
The Reading Rainbow. Reading Rainbow.
Way up in the sky.
We were talking about reading studies.
Yeah.
So, as some may have heard, there was recently a study that came out that was talking about physical activity and its association with COVID-19. And so, at least for me, it's like through like social media and stuff, I've been seeing a bunch of fitness people, gyms, whatever, just quote the study in certain aspects, being like, this is why gyms needed to be open, blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, okay, well, this would be a good point, like a good time to talk about like how to read a study. So I have pulled an article from one of my favorite websites, examine.com, not sponsored. And not yet. And then, figured that we can kind of learn a little bit about like how studies are written and read, and kind of give some context into like what some of these things mean.
Yeah.
And then kind of go through, and we could talk about this COVID study and maybe apply a little bit of what we learned.
Yeah.
As well as just, I think it's good to just kind of go over the study, because it was informative. It was very, I feel like the information that I picked up from it was crucial to the health of those who were in need last year. Yeah.
Like, if this information would have been, I guess, better publicized, things may have been different last year.
Yeah. The TLDR is the more active you were, the less likely you were to have less severe symptoms if you were to contract COVID. Mm-hmm. So, in case you're curious, if you want to just get the meat and potatoes out of the way, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what the article was about. Sorry.
So there you go.
We're dragging it out.
Yeah, but we'll go a little bit further. I want to read a little bit into it, because I think it is pretty cool.
I think
a bunch of reasons.
But I like how we're going to do it, because, including myself, I didn't know how to read the study. I was just trying to break the information down myself. And I think a lot of people who are going to listen are going to appreciate that, hey, like, this is how you should read the study. This is what some of these terminology mean. And then they can follow along with that. I think we'll probably provide the link to that article anyway, or that study.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they could follow along while they're reading this, or just have it up on a screen somewhere. And
Totally. So like I said, so the article that I got is about, it's called How to Read a Study, which is from examine.com, which I'll definitely include a link on that, because I think it is, I've cited studies before, and made comments about it. And I remember one of the main comments that I've gotten in kind of response to whenever I've posted studies is that they're hard to read. My ignorance at the time was kind of along the lines of like, well, they're not that hard to read, but also I studied science, and so I'm relatively familiar with like how to write research papers or like research articles and how to present the information that you get. Now I'm not an expert, so don't quote me on that one, but I'm more familiar, I think, than most.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of my hubris was like, what are you talking about? It's not that hard.
This is easy.
But in reality, it can be. And so there's tricky language and statistics that can often be misguided.
Yeah.
Or misguide people, I should say. So anyway, let's go ahead and let's just run through. I'll just kind of read through this whole thing and then stop me at any point where you're just like, if you have something you want to chat about. Yeah, you'll get a little buzzer. So pretty much most research papers are broken up into a couple different, more or less kind of a bunch of different subsections. So you're going to usually look at like the abstract, the introduction, methods, results, discussion, and then you should see something that is a conflict of interest. You don't, and we'll get into it, but you don't normally see a lot of like conflict of interest stuff, which I think is wildly important, especially because there are a lot of things that come out where you don't know effectively where the money comes from that funds the study.
Right.
And oftentimes, one of the big things that you used to see back in the day was, for example, in like the 40s and the 50s, smoking was good for you. Well, when you look into like who were the people that wrote these articles and these studies, the money came from tobacco. And so it was in the favor of the tobacco companies to find people who are going to present information to want people to smoke more.
Yeah.
Similar thing happened with like sugar.
I was going to say the most recent one would be the Coca-Cola backed articles and sugar.
Yep. Even worse, there was a lot of stuff. There was a big controversy that kind of, I don't know if it actually got a whole lot of attention, but it was, you eventually learned, there was an article that was coming out about statins. It's like like statins, so like blood pressure as well as lipid profile and like cholesterol medicine. And it was study cited by the American Heart Association, but what wasn't readily available unless you did a little bit further digging was to find that the company that was producing this statin just showed these amazing results of medical engineering. The maker of that drug was also a large sponsor of the American Heart Association. So there's a huge conflict of interest of a medical community given lots of money by a drug company that then was also publishing data to push the drug company.
Yeah.
So that was a huge issue. And then also you don't know you don't know who the corporate sponsors are of the American Heart Association anymore because they took it off the website at that point.
They're hiding shit.
Yeah. So, don't let, I will say with this, with like some context to it, is like, yes, that is a thing that exists in the world and you got to be aware of it. But don't put your tinfoil hats on yet and start thinking that every single like thing that comes out is going to be like funded by money or funded by some like massive corporation that's
corporate
like
America.
Yeah, right. I was talking to one of my clients today because we were talking because she asked what we were going to talk about tonight, and I was like, we're going to talk about COVID and this COVID study as well as like how to read research papers, and so we were kind of talking about like thoughts about like COVID and like health and exercise, and I was like, I'm like the downfall. I'm like one of the downfalls is like people will kind of loosely read stuff and then just immediately assume that like big pharma or like there's some secret government conspiracy into all of these things. And I was like, don't put your tinfoil hat on yet. So I've said that phrase twice today. So there you go. Anyway. Okay. So let's break these things down a little bit.
Do it.
So starting off with the abstract. So the abstract is usually it's a brief summary that covers kind of the main points of a study. So usually if you look something up through like the any research articles or like Google Scholar, for example, is a great place to go to like find research. The first thing that you're usually going to read is the abstract. So there's a lot of information that needs to is packed into a few paragraphs in that initial spot. And so that's you can use that as kind of a reference point, but they can unintentionally be misleading purely because you don't get all of the details, right? It's a snapshot of usually a huge paper. So because it doesn't usually provide context, an abstract does not usually offer or make clear the limitations of an experiment or how applicable the results are in the real world. So like before, and this is kind of, again, synonymous with what's a lot of what we see right now through like Facebook is just like reading headlines and just running with it and not even going any deeper. So before citing a study as any evidence and like in discussion, please make sure that you read the whole paper, because it might turn out that the evidence is super weak. And so to put some like context even more so behind that, we did an episode talking about supplements, and I used Examine as kind of my reference guide for a lot of the information that we got. And so one of the things that's really crazy is like if you were to read an abstract, again, it's kind of giving you a synopsis of like the entirety of the paper, but it can also then it can cite stats and it can give you numbers and whatever the case may be, but context is key here. And so a lot of like supplement companies, like, if you ever go to like GNC, look at a protein powder, look at like, gives, 45% increase in muscle mass. And you're like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then if you actually go and further and trying to find that study or the research that they did, you find it's like with 4 people.
Yeah.
And that means nothing. Yeah. Like that statistically, that means absolutely nothing.
That's a 0.1% increase.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and then the other part is like, what is a baseline? And I'm not going to get into all of that part because there is tricky stats that you can use to make your point that sound way better than they really are. And if you go back to some of the statin studies, that's exactly what you normally see. So you feel like you can see like 70% decrease in like HDL levels or something like that. But in reality, and as you dive a little bit deeper into it, like it dropped it like maybe realistically like 1 or 2 points, which means absolutely nothing.
Yeah. You get a result that it dropped, but it wouldn't be enough to be a satisfactory across the board.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a way to mess with numbers to make them sound way better, but also you're not lying, but it's intentionally misleading.
Yeah.
So after the abstract, then it'll actually get into the paper itself. And so you'll see the introduction. So the introduction is literally what it is. It's the introduction sets up the stage. Ideally, it should clearly identify the research question the authors hope to answer. Here, the authors usually summarize previous related research and explain why they decided to investigate further. So, for example, the non-caloric sweetener stevia showed promise as a way to help improve blood sugar control, particularly in diabetics. So researchers set out to conduct larger, more rigorous trials to determine if stevia could be an effective treatment for diabetes. Introductions are often a great place to find additional reading material since the authors will frequently reference previous, relevant, and published studies. I think going through the introductions of papers is a really good thing because like I just said, it sets the stage for what is to be expected. And a big thing about published research articles is with the intention, or should be the intention, that somebody can replicate this entire thing. And if you can, another scientist is kind of the ideal, but you should, as a lay person in the sense of a non-scientist, you should be able to read through that and get a fairly good gist of like what the hell this thing is about and kind of what they're trying to do. So if you can't do that, then you can probably start to assume that either it's probably not a great paper, or that it could be a little bit misleading, but who knows? Yeah, it's rough. All right, so usually next up on the block is methods. So the methods or materials and methods section provides information on the study's design and its participants. Ideally, it should be so clear and detailed that other researchers can repeat the study without needing to contact the authors.
Look at you.
I know, right? You'll need to examine this section to determine the study's strengths and limitations, which both affect how the study's results should be interpreted. A methods section will contain a few key pieces of information that you should pay attention to. So we'll look at demographics. So this is information on the participants, such as age, sex, lifestyle, health status, and method of recruitment. The information will help decide how relevant the study is to you, your loved ones, and your clients. So confounders. So the demographic information will usually mention if people were excluded from the study, and if so, for what reasons. Most often, the reason is the existence of a confounder, which is a variable that would confound the results. I.e., it would really mess them up. So a confounder is usually like an outlier to a situation within the group where they're like, okay, this will like heavily skew the results. So you're trying to get like a similar population to kind of keep as many variables consistent as possible. Again, because their goal is to try and make it repeatable.
Yeah.
So after that, you'll see usually design. So the design variants include single-blind trials in which only the participants don't know if they're receiving a placebo, observational studies. This is where researchers only observe a demographic and take measurements. This is where you will learn about the length of the study, interventions, and the interventions used. So that can be like supplements, exercise routines, etc., and the testing methods and so on. So essentially, the design is just outline like here are the steps to how we got, who are the people like, yeah. So we already got our people. So it's the steps of like, how did we test it? So you'll hear about like single blind, double blind, placebo. So to get an idea, like a double blind placebo study is kind of like the best of the best in that sense. And so a double blind means that the first blind is that the participants in the study don't know what they're getting. So for example, it could be like, here's a drug for statins. I guess we're going to keep going with statins.
Yeah, we go statin.
So it's like, here's a statin. That's what's going to be the basis of the study, but the participant does not know which one you get.
Yeah.
So either you get a sugar pill or you get an actual statin. Then the second blind, which makes it the double blind, is then the researchers themselves don't know. So I don't know which one you got either, other than I know that you got something.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason why you want stuff like that is because there's always a chance for bias or human error to be involved when you know kind of the results, especially as you're starting to look at results and you know who got what and where. So it's definitely like the more that you can kind of limit any external variables of people kind of muddying the waters, the better. But I know we talked about this before, like when we were talked about like, I think when we were in our recovery episode, we were referencing like ice.
Yeah.
Ice is one of those ones where like you can't do a placebo study because you can't fake cold necessarily.
Right.
Right. So based on the tests that you're going to be getting, there's also going to be limitations in what can be tested. So, this is like, an important part also to know of like how, like what was the design of the study? Because what you're going to find out, for example, for this, spoilers, but for this COVID study, it was all observational. So you are now with that is in the sense that they're not designing anything that any of these the participants in the study like interacted with. They literally gave them a questionnaire. And so that in its own has kind of its own inherent flaws to it because there's always the chance that people lie.
Right.
So there's issues with it that kind of exist. Now that's not to necessarily denounce it as something that's not trustworthy, but it is something to make note of these numbers may be slightly skewed purely because you have to kind of trust in the goodwill of the people giving you answers.
Yeah. Human response.
Yeah, human response. Right? We've all lied on that thing of, we've all lied. And it's like, how tall are you? I'm like, yeah, definitely, 5'10".
Oh yeah, I'm 5'11" and a half.
Yeah, on a good day. Jinx. So usually after that, you'll see like endpoints. So the methods section can also make clear the endpoints the research will be looking at. For instance, the study on the effects of resistance training program could use muscle mass as its primary endpoint. It's the main criteria to judge the outcome of the study, and fat mass, strength performance, testosterone levels as is like a secondary endpoint. So all endpoint is like, what is it that they are trying to look at as like the result of the study? So for example, for this COVID one, we're looking at what we're going to be looking at is what is the rate at which for people who had essentially no exercise, some exercise, and then met kind of the standard of exercise that they were looking for, and then compared that with each of those groups who all contracted COVID. the severity of it. So were they hospitalized? Were they in the ICU? Or did they die?
Mm-hmm.
So the morbidity is the term that I'll be using for that. And then we'll look at statistics. So finally, the methods section usually concludes with a hearty statistic discussion, and this is usually where things get very confusing. So this is determining whether an appropriate statistical analysis was used for a given trial is an entire field of study. So definitely suggest you don't sweat the details and try to focus on the bigger picture. So speaking of the statistics, statisticians are crazy. And its stats are very funky, again, because they can be worked and worded in so many different ways, and the ways that you can even get them are kind of insane.
Yeah.
And how you do measure all these like variables and all this stuff. So if you've never taken a stats class, don't stress too much about this section because it can be very confusing as you try and like read through it. I took stats and I still have a hard time.
I failed stats twice before I had to take stats for a liberal arts major, and then I got a C-. So I fucking hate stats.
Yeah. It was not a fun one for me. I really did not enjoy it. Okay, so first, let's go up 2 common misunderstandings. You may have read that an effect was significant, only to later discover that it was very small.
Yeah.
Similarly, you may have read that no effect was found, yet when you read the paper, you found that the intervention group, which is the one that actually got the drug, for example, had lost more weight than the placebo group. So what gives? The problem is simple. Those quirky scientists don't speak like normal people, which is true. And this is important to note, right? So for scientists, significant doesn't mean important.
Yeah.
It means statistically significant. So an effect is significant if the data that's collected over the course of the trial would be unlikely if there really was no effect. So something that is, so that's pretty much that. So therefore, an effect can be significant yet very small. So for example, half a pound of weight loss over a year, for instance. But more to the point, an effect can be significant yet not clinically relevant, meaning that it has no discernible effect on your health. Confused yet?
Very, very.
So all that's kind of well, let me read on and then I'll kind of go for it. So relatedly for scientists, no effect usually means no statistical significant effect. So that's why you may review the measurements collected over the course of a trial and notice an increase or decrease, yet read in the conclusion that no change or no effect was found. There were changes, but they weren't significant. In other words, there were changes, but they were so small that they may be due to random fluctuations. So they may also be due to an actual effect. We don't know for sure.
Yeah.
So
like that half a pound example is like, it's not significant.
Exactly.
And something else could have affected that.
Yep. Right. So usually you can look into some of these studies when we're talking about like statistical significance is, again, it's kind of also when we look at like statistical significance is also measuring kind of the strength of the study and knowing that if something is statistically relevant within the course of the study, we know that there's a fairly strong reason to believe that it wasn't like an outlier, that it wasn't that one person who slipped in from the testing pool that was like the random person who was like way off the charts for some whatever reason. So the next part, and so this is still within kind of statistics, the stats, is we're going to look at p-values. Which is usually a wildly tricky thing, and most people don't pay attention to, unless you've done stats. So understanding how to interpret p-values correctly can be very tricky, even for people who are statisticians. But there's an easy way to kind of think about it. So the way that this article is using it is, think of it as like a coin toss. So you're to flip 100 coins, and you'll get roughly a 50-50 split of heads and tails. That's not surprising. But what if you flip this same coin 100 times and you get heads every single time? That would be surprising. So you can think of p-values in terms of getting all heads when flipping a coin. So you'll usually see like percentages of p-values, and sometimes you'll see decimal points of p-values, which are the exact same thing. It's just written out. So like 5% is technically 0.05. So this is no more of a surprise than getting all heads on 4 coin flips. Of 5, so then you can see 0.5%, which would be 0.005. So this would be more. This is no more surprising than being able to get all heads on 8 coins. And then, for example, a 0.05%, which would be 0.0005, would be like getting heads on 11 coin tosses. So a result is said to be statistically significant if the value is under the threshold of significance, which is generally 0.05 or 5%. So the other thing that sometimes you will see within these is, whoops, clicked to the wrong page. Is also something called a confidence interval. And so a confidence interval provides information about a range in which the true value lies within a certain degree of probability, as well as it also helps to explain the direction and strength of the demonstrated effect, or the results. So in this article, you don't get a p-value. You actually will see the CI, or confidence interval. And so you can kind of think of these things as relatively related in the same sense. So if we're looking at something like a p-value of, say, 5%, then we would then you can also start to assume that you would see like a confidence interval of like 95%. So it's kind of where that little 5% lies. It kind of makes up for the 100. So just a rough way to kind of think about it, but nonetheless. So, but in this article, you'll be seeing more of like the confidence interval. So after that, usually after we get into like all the stats and information, we start to look at results. And so this is essentially the conclusion, where the researchers will discuss their primary outcome, or what they were most interested in investigating, in a section commonly called results, or results in discussion. So one thing, though, is skipping right to this section after reading the abstract might be tempting, but this usually leads to misinterpretations and then following the spread of misinformation. So never read the results without first reading like the method section. Because you need to know how researchers arrived to the conclusion, as it's important as the conclusion itself. So one of the first things to look at in the results section is a comparison of characteristics between the tested groups. Big differences in baseline characteristics after randomization may mean the two groups are not truly comparable. These differences could be a result of the chance or of the randomization method being applied incorrectly. So all that is essentially saying is that you want to. So usually when you're looking at research groups, or when you're testing with people, for say, there's a randomization process. And there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of go about randomizing the people to essentially dictate which group they're in. So if you're like confused by what I'm saying about that, if you go back to high school or grade school or something, and you're trying to figure out who's going to be on the baseball team or the softball team for gym, and you're going like A, B, or 1, 2, 1, 2, that's kind of like the randomization process. Now there's other ways to do it better. Especially when you're testing across large groups, when you start looking at demographics such as like age, sex, race, I already said age, but that type of thing. So there's ways to randomize them appropriately, so that way it doesn't mess with the results, again, or biases. So that's kind of what that means. Oftentimes then you'll see researchers usually will report dropout or compliance rates. So life frequently gets in the way of science, and so almost every trial has its share of participants that don't finish the trial or failed to follow the instructions appropriately. This is especially true for trials that are long or constraining. Diet trials, for instance, are super hard, and that's part of, and I think we even talked about this before, of one of the hard parts about doing food or nutrition related studies is most people don't stick to it.
Yeah.
Or they do something outside of what the parameters of the tests are, and it messes with the results. So
you got to sneak in a cheeseburger, man. Fuck.
It's hard. I mean, it's hard. And this is like, this is one of those things that really, it's one of the things that really gets to me when people start kind of questioning science, I guess, and questioning studies.
Yeah.
And again, I know that 100% of them are not perfect. Like that's an impossibility to assume. And there's going to be shit studies that come out, and there's going to be biased studies that come out 100%. But you kind of have to trust in the process. And the fact that and I think part of the fact is for us to kind of go through and talk about this, it just kind of shows a little bit of the importance of the scientific method. And when applied appropriately, will get you to where you want to be and trying to discover what the hell somebody's trying to research. And this whole thing is like really just skirting the surface of like what goes into the actual design of a study and how to go about doing it in such a way so that way you can account for biases, you can account for people people who are going to drop out, you can account for like everything, and then how to do the math and like what's good ways to do the math and what's bad ways to do it. Like there's so much to the design of these things that like it's frustrating to hear people just immediately write this stuff off. We have to, you can be critical of it, but you have to be critical to a point where you can also trust. And my biggest fear through how the world has been going right now is that we're losing trust within the scientific community. And that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. So don't do that.
Yeah.
You got to believe.
Trust the process.
Yeah, you have to trust the process.
In most things.
Yeah, seriously. All right. So anyway, so researchers also have to report. Did I just read this? Trial or failed below the instructions. This is especially all right. I read that one. Whoops. So still too great a proportion of dropouts or non-compliant participants should raise an eyebrow, especially if one group has a much higher dropout rate than the others. So scientists use questionnaires, blood panels, and other methods of gathering data, all of which can be displayed throughout charts and graphs, which you usually see. So be sure to check out the vertical axis, which is the y-axis, the scale the results are represented on. What may at first look like a large change could in fact be very minor. So you got to look at the values that are on that scale. Sometimes they go by decimal places and not like tens.
Yeah.
So the results section can also include a secondary analysis, such as a subgroup analysis. So a subgroup analysis is when the researchers run another statistical test, but only on a subset of the participants. So for example, if your trial includes both males and females of all ages, you could perform your analysis only on the female data or only 1 over 65 data to see if you get a different result. So it's just a way to kind of break down the overall results in a little bit of a different way, just kind of for like more random information, or not random information, more information. Then we'll usually end. So we got usually 2 more things that we'll kind of end on. So we got the discussion. Sometimes the conclusion is split between results and discussion. Sometimes they're kind of connected. But in the discussion section, the authors usually elaborate more on the value of their work. They also clarify their interpretation of the results or the hypotheses, or hypothesize a mechanism of action, i.e. biochemistry underlying the effect. Often they will compare the study to previous ones and suggest new experiments that could be conducted based on their study's results. It is very, very important to remember that a single study is just one piece of a giant puzzle. So where does this one fit in with the body of evidence on the topic? So it's very, very rare that you're going to have kind of some sort of study that doesn't have other things that it's citing. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you usually see like little like 1s and 2s bracketed above like the end of a sentence. If you go towards the end of the paper, usually towards the bottom, you're going to see the bibliography, which is just all of the cited sources and where they get information from.
We've all had to cite shit in college.
Yeah,
MLA format.
Oh, the worst.
No, I think Chicago style format was the worst.
Which, funny enough, I've never had to do.
I've had to do.
Well, that's more for writing, isn't it?
Yeah,
like journalism.
Yeah. Well, I had teachers who were like, I never took journalism class. My teachers were like journalism majors, and they wanted Chicago style format, and I was like, man, I went through all of high school and 3 years before there's MLA. You want me to switch to Chicago now? I don't know how to do that shit.
That's why you go to, what was it, Easy Bib?
Yeah.
And you just type it in, they just do it. Oh, that was the best. So where are we at?
We finished discussion.
Often they
results.
The authors. Okay. So yeah. So a body of evidence on the topic. Perfect. Right. So then, God, I'm getting ahead of myself. So then usually after that, the authors will lay out some of the strengths and weaknesses of the study. Or their study. So examine these super critically. And I think this is a really important part to make note of. So did the authors do a good job of covering both? Did they leave out a critical limitation? You don't need to take their reporting at face value, analyze it. So a good research study will cite and note any limitations within what they were able to do. as well as just generally note limitations of like we only were available to do a questionnaire. With questionnaires comes an inherent weakness to the study because there's variables that you can't control, et cetera, et cetera. So that's always really important to look at within a paper to make sure that that's in there. Because that means that they're doing their due diligence to be like, here is what we couldn't do. But if someone were to be able to run, say, this exact same thing, here are things that we would recommend to make it a more sound or more strengthen it in a way, so that way it can be kind of held up against more scrutiny.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the last part that sometimes you don't get, but you definitely should get, is a conflict of interests, or COI. Sometimes you'll see it on there, if they exist. So there's usually disclosed after the conclusion. So a conflict of interest can occur when the people who design, conduct, or analyze research have a motive behind certain results. Kind of like what we talked about at the very beginning with like tobacco.
Yeah.
So the most obvious source of conflict of interest is the financial aspect of it. So when a study has been sponsored by a company, for instance, or when one of the authors works for a company that would gain from the study backing a certain effect, which is crazy to think that that's a thing that happens, but it does. So sadly, one study suggested the non-disclosures of conflicts of interest is somewhat common. Additionally, what is considered a conflict of interest by one journal may not be it of another. And some journals can themselves have conflicts of interests, yet they don't have to disclose them. A journal from a country that exports a lot of a certain herb, for instance, may have hidden incentives to publish studies that back the benefits of that herb. So it isn't because the study is about an herb in general and not a specific product that you can assume there is no conflict of interest. So conflicts of interests are definitely one to look out for. We already kind of hit at the very beginning, is an important aspect to it. But yeah, usually money is largely what you're going to see from it. And sometimes if they're not noted, you can also then, if you really wanted to dig in and find out like what's happening, you can start to look at the researchers themselves and see like, where do they research from? Where do they work? You can usually find who their funding is from, because a lot of this stuff is public information, but it's not readily public info. So you can find it. You just got to dig.
There's a trail.
So conflict of interest must be evaluated carefully. So don't automatically assume that they don't exist just because they don't disclose it. But also don't assume that they necessarily influence the results if they do exist. So I think like for an example on this one, the COVID study that we're going to read it's all through Kaiser Permanente. So if you're, not from the Los Angeles area, Kaiser is a giant hospital.
Yeah.
All over Southern California. And so this is where they got a lot of their participants, largely because, they did something within the study that a lot of hospitals don't do. So it kind of gave it a little bit stronger legs to stand on.
Are they the ones, does Kaiser have the commercial that says live well, be well, and thrive? Is that theirs, or is that?
I have no idea. All I know is that whenever I've talked to anybody about like where I should get insurance,
They say Kaiser?
No, they're like, well, Kaiser's a pretty good, but you have to go within Kaiser.
Yeah.
So like, you can't go anywhere else except.
Yeah, except Kaiser.
Yeah.
And then good luck getting in.
I remember when I got into my motorcycle accident, I didn't know where to go.
Yeah.
And so I just knew that Kaiser was a close hospital, and so that's where I went. And they were like, "You're not a Kaiser person. We can't take you." And I'm like, "What am I supposed to do?" And they're
go
like,
to the nearest ER.
Yeah, there's some other one like down the street. You can go to that one. I'm like, you seriously kick? I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Should have just gone to Scientology. They would have taken care of you for a nominal fee.
I have no comment on that.
And your life.
I would just have to sign my 10,000 year contract.
Yeah. Your soul.
Well, I need to find out how many thetans I have. So the last little bit into this before we get into the fun stuff is so clickbait. That's a huge part. So clickbait headlines, usually not from the study itself, but other people who are citing the study, which is like ridiculous. That's what you're going to see in like most news organizations. If you're a Facebook person, that's pretty much everything that you read on Facebook is a clickbait title.
Yahoo is the worst.
Yahoo is really bad about it.
I hate them.
So definitely don't take titles for that. So never assume that the media has read the entire study, which is, I feel like, should be very, very common at this, or clear to most people at this point.
Yeah.
So a survey that assessed the quality of the evidence for dietary advice given in the UK national newspapers found that between 69 and 72% of the health claims were based on deficient or insufficient evidence. To meet deadlines, overworked journalists frequently rely on study press releases, which often fail to accurately summarize the study's findings. So there is something where like articles or journals will put out like a media like synopsis essentially, and people will just kind of run with that.
Yeah, because that's more. It's not a breakdown. It's more of an overview of what was going on in the study, and then like you said, they'll take that, run with it, and be like, oh, they said 95%. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll just fucking throw that number out there.
Yeah, it's effectively the abstract of a study, but like written in a way that the common person can like easily understand.
Cliff notes.
Effectively it's Cliff Notes. But there's no substitute for appraising a study yourself. So when in doubt, reread its method sections to better assess its strengths and potential limitations. And just again, remember, one study is just one piece of a puzzle, of a large puzzle. So reading several studies on a given topic will provide you with more information and more data. Even if you don't know how to run a meta-analysis, which a meta-analysis is essentially taking, so say for example, bench press builds muscle. I don't know why that's the first thing that came to my head, but sure, that's where we're at. And so what you do in a meta-analysis is you essentially take as many research articles that are around the concept of bench pressing building muscle, and you take an aggregate of all of the information that you get from it and kind of make your own study off of it, which is kind of interesting. And there's so much detail into how to run a good meta-analysis, on how to pick the appropriate topics and research studies to cite in this information. So that way, again, like just like when you're looking at like demographics, when you're trying to pick people for, say, a study, you have to kind of weed out anomalies or ones that aren't going to accurately fit in with like the larger group as a whole. The same thing has to be done whenever you're running like a meta-analysis or trying to do that study or do a study of a meta-analysis. So that way you're not getting like bunk information that's going to mess up your study itself. So for instance, if you read one study that looked at the effects of creatine on testosterone and it found an increase, then 100% of your data says that creatine increases testosterone. Effectively all that's saying is that's just continuation of like, if you only look at one study, then you only have one set of information to pull from. But if you were to read 10 well-conducted studies that looked at the effect of creatine on testosterone and only one found an increase, then you have a more complete picture of the evidence, which indicates creatine does not increase testosterone, which it doesn't. So going over and assessing just one paper can be a lot of work, hours if not. But knowing the basics of a study's assessment is important. But we also understand that people have lives to lead, so no single person has the time to read all of the new studies coming out. And certain studies can benefit from being read by professionals with different areas of expertise. So that's kind of it. So breaks down a little bit of the how papers are, kind of the general concepts that you're going to see. So just remember, as a refresher, it's the abstract, the introduction, methods, results, discussion, and hopefully conflicts of interest. And if you have the ability to read more than one. Mm-hmm. There's also this, it's an interesting part too, like depending on the topic or the field that you are looking into, there are a metric shit ton of publishing companies that publish like research papers. And some are a little bit more well-known than others, and some are more well-known for being and producing shit. And yes. So for example, with me, a place that I usually will go to when we're looking at information for supplements is examine.com. And Examine is a good way, is a perfect example of like a meta-analysis where again, it's, when we were talking about creatine, well, there's, 60 different sources that you can pull from for how Examine concluded the evidence as a whole. So you can read all of those sources if you want to read about those papers. And so Examine is literally a meta-analysis website for specifically supplements and like nutritional dietary supplements. The journal, like in popular ones that you're going to hear about, like for us in like in the like exercise world, is like the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, which is an NSCA program, which we've talked to previously in a previous one of our CrossFit episodes about how the NSCA has a little bit of a history of running bullshit articles, as well as the Journal of Strength and Conditioning followed suit. So, do with that information as you will, but largely that is, you have to look at it in that CrossFit example as, those specific researchers had a motive and they sought through to see that motive to completion. So that you think of it, you kind of have to think of it as like the bad apple type of thing.
Yeah.
And you can't assume that everybody else within it is shit.
Yeah.
Similar to like CrossFit, right? We got Ricky Garrard who popped for steroids. That's one person. We can't then just assume that every other person is taking steroids.
Exactly.
So
we are, but
I mean, yeah, Eric and I are just we have the testosterone of a square city block in LA.
That's right. Powered by a nuclear warhead.
So hopefully that gave you some info. So that way, when we go into
the next part,
now we can go into the next part. I should ask, how do you want me to go? I have the study in front of me. Do you want me to just like read through it or kind of like bullet point it?
I think bullet point it, because I'm sure, if people are interested in this, they'll look it up, because we'll provide the link to it.
Yeah.
I think we should bullet point, summarize, and then like how we talked about it, hit the intro, and then hit how the case is done, kind of bullet point the next parts, and then hit that conclusion, and then,
go from there.
How we felt about it.
And then discuss.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I like that. All right. So the abstract, we'll just kind of hop right into it. So this is perfect, right? It gives you the objective of the overall study. So it's to compare hospitalization rates, intensive care unit admission, so ICU, and mortality for patients with COVID-19 who were consistently inactive, doing some activity, or consistently meeting physical activity guidelines. So there we go. So we got kind of three pieces that we're looking at. So whether you were admitted to the hospital, whether you went to the ICU, or if you died. Mm-hmm. And then within that, we're looking at people who were consistently inactive, some active, or consistently meeting physical activity guidelines. Mm-hmm. And so to give some context into a little bit of what that is, so for the physical activity guidelines, this is from the U.S. It's the U.S. Center of Disease Control and Prevention, so the CDC.
Yeah.
And this is crazy. But the physical activity guidelines calls for adults to engage in at minimum 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So, and these are similar guidelines that have been set across from like other health agencies kind of across the world. But 150 minutes, that's the minimum.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, most people do not do that.
Which is insane.
Which is absolutely terrifying.
If you break it down, it's 2.5 hours. That's 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. People cannot do any, choose not to do any physical rigorous activity for 2.5 hours over 7 days.
That's it's just over 20 minutes a week.
Yeah. 7 days.
Yeah.
You could go for a fucking jog for 25 minutes.
A brisk walk is technically the term.
Go adopt a dog. Go walk your dog for 25 minutes a day.
Yeah. So that's to give some context as a whole. Most people don't hit that number,
which is insane.
But it's not our listeners.
No,
you guys are. You
guys exceed by going 151 minutes.
Yeah.
Of vigorous activity.
Overachievers.
That's right. We're so proud of you.
Proud dads.
If you hit that 152, hit us up. We got something special for you. Okay.
We're shouting you out.
Yeah. All right.
So within that, so we'll look at the methods. So within this, they identified 48,440 weird.
I read that and I was like, that's such a weird number.
Yeah, a lot of fours.
Yeah.
Adult patients with COVID-19 diagnosis, and so this is from the January 1 of 2020 to October 21st, 2020. So I mean, it's a 10-month study, which is pretty awesome. As well as there's 48,000 people that were a part of this, which is even better. So when we were talking about, the protein study with 4 people, that means absolutely nothing.
But this amount,
this is a significant amount, and this is a significant amount of people, to be looked at. So, now part of the so whatever, with at least 3 exercise vital sign measurements from March 19th, which is from March 18th to March 19th, 2018 to March 18th, 2020. So Kaiser has a question within their check-in process that asks about exercise. So this is kind of what they're getting at. So these were already like questions asked prior to people coming in for this specific study. And so within that, they define what exercise looks like. So consistently inactive is 0 to 10 minutes per week. Some active is 11 to 149 minutes per week. And consistently meeting the guidelines or active would be 150 plus per week. And then, so So then if we're going to look at results, let's not get there yet.
No.
So going a little bit deeper into the methods. So the study is a retrospective observational study in which physical activity was documented in Jesus Christ. There's a lot of acronyms in here. So there's like 3s and 2 letters. So I'm trying to remember what these are as I read it out loud. But this is a retrospective observational study in which physical activity was documented within the 2 years preceding the March 2020 pandemic lockdown, specifically of Southern California. It was conducted by Kaiser Permanente to give some numbers. So it's an integrated healthcare system that serves approximately 4.7 million residents of Southern California, has 15 medical centers. So racial/ethnic makeup, neighborhood education, and household income are generally similar to the area population. So just to kind of give an idea of like how they looked at it. So the cohort, there's a study cohort. So the inclusion criteria consisted of Kaiser health plan members aged 18 and older that had a positive COVID-19 test or diagnosis between January 1st and October 21st. Participants were continually enrolled in Kaiser for at least 6 months prior to the COVID-19 diagnosis, and they required patients the study required patients to have at least 3 outpatient visits with an exercise vital sign measurement between March 19th, 2018 and March 19th, 2020. So that way they can kind of increase the likelihood that the assessment captured regular physical activity habits. Yeah. So again, this was, other than the fact that it was a questionnaire, essentially, they did a pretty decent job, in my opinion, at trying to take out some of the potential bullshit by what I just read, which was that people came into their doctor's office at least 3 times before coming into before having COVID, so that way they had some sort of like baseline to go off of, like whether or not or how active they were, which I like a lot.
Yeah. Unless
they all lied.
Unless they all lied or Kaiser knew COVID was coming.
So the questions during the intake for at each of the outpatient visit was, on average, how many days per week do you engage in moderate to strenuous exercise, like a brisk walk, and on average, how many minutes do you engage in exercise at this level?
You just to go back on that, a brisk walk is vigorous exercise.
Well, moderate.
Moderate exercise. I see what we do, and we have moderate days, which are still hard days.
Yes.
I guess the terminology is just different, and the perspective of terminology is just different.
Yeah. Well, you have to think too, and just remember, the amount of people that, and this is the tough part, right? Like, if you really want to dive into this, how do you define exercise?
Yeah.
So I view exercise as a planned, like a planned or structured activity that you're setting yourself out for. So I not like I'm going to just take my dog out for a walk because that's something you have to do, but it's like I am planning to take my dog out for a 25-minute walk, like at blank time.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm going to go to the gym at blank time to do blank, while I'm there.
Yeah.
Right. But it's a pre-planned, kind of a premeditated activity. And that's how I define exercise. Now, I don't know how they necessarily defined it within this. It doesn't say, but it is a striking and concerning aspect to the state of our health when that is the bare minimum to try and get people to move.
Yeah. And I'm not knocking people's exercise. Like, if a brisk walk is your exercise, by all means.
Yeah.
Fucking knock it out. We're always advocates for any type of movement. It's just, like you said, the standard, the minimum is that. And it's just like, God, there's got to be more to it. But again,
it doesn't, that's kind of it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't remember the number, but that's very similar to what the World Health Organization recommends as a whole. Who? The Who. The Who, Eric.
They were a good band.
You're talking about the Monkees.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But within that, so within those questions, people had choices for either 0 to 7 days, and for the minutes they recorded from 0, 10, 20, 30, all the way up to 150 or greater. So this is where the responses were recorded. So I don't really, there is a data analysis thing. So effectively all this part is really talking about is just, it takes note of variables within. So looking at people with previous underlying conditions. So they kind of noted which ones they considered to be more relevant, that they were including within the history. So this was like cancer, kidney disease, COPD, CVD, which is cardiovascular disease. Where are we at? Oh my God, there's too much. Organ transplants, obesity, diabetes, pregnancy, smoking. That was actually pretty much it. So they also included history of hypertension and an emergency department visit or hospitalization the 6 months prior to their COVID-19 diagnosis as covariates. So let's get.
Are the covariates the one that they kicked out just to?
No. So covariates in this sense are just other varieties of like medical conditions that they also were like aware of. So all right. So results is kind of the fun one. So I'm just kind of cycling through this a little bit. Okay. So results. So and this is kind of, now this is, we'll start to kind of talk about what you were asking. So they identified 103,000 patients with a diagnosis of COVID-19 or a positive result with a PCR test during this study period. Of those 103,000, 84,000 were 18 years or older and continuously enrolled in Kaiser's healthcare plan during the 6 months prior to their COVID-19 diagnosis. So among those 84,000, 48,000 patients had 3 or more of the health measurements within the 2 years prior to the pandemic. And the majority of the patients, which is 61% within that cohort, had 5 or more. So effectively, so this is now where they started to whittle things down based on kind of certain criteria they were looking at. So for example, 103,000 They moved it down to 84,000 that they needed to be 18 years or older. Of that 84,000, 48,000 had 3 or more of those measurements, those health measurements that they were looking at. So this is where they started to break things down. And this is where they're kind of taking out some of those outliers to make it a little bit more specific. And then they added a nice little note to it, which is kind of cool, is that, so of that 48,000, 61% of them, I don't have the quick math on that. I can't do quick math like that.
48,000, 68%?
61.
61.
But 61% of those did 5 or more, leaving 39.8% that had, so 20, essentially 30,000 people had 5 or more, and about 18,000 had, the minimum of 3. So it's pretty nice, right? So there's a good baseline measurement of activity to be set. So demographics wise, so the mean age was about 47 years old, the median being 47, so kind of right in the middle of it. So 61% were females, which then leaves you with 39% being males. 6.4 were consistently meeting the guidelines. 14 were consistently inactive, and the remaining were inactive.
Wait. Okay, so 6.4 were the meeting the guidelines.
Yep.
What was it, 13?
So 6.4% were meeting guidelines.
Okay.
14% were consistently inactive.
So the gray area.
No, so those were the ones that weren't doing anything.
Oh, the 0 to 20 people.
0 to like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yep, and then the rest of them, which is nice.
Okay,
right?
so that scared me for a second.
You're like,
because I was like, wait a minute. Yeah. I thought the third number was the worst number.
No. So the third number, which would be about 80, just about 79% were doing something. But that's less than 149 minutes worth of activity a week.
Right, yeah. God, 6%.
Yep.
6% of 48,000. That's just under 3,000 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is just within Kaiser.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so then within the demographics, they look at, they didn't break down exactly what it was, but regardless, so white patients were more likely to be meeting the physical activity guidelines, which was 9.4% of honkies met the guideline. Asian patients were 7.3%, Hispanic were 5.5%, and African American were 4.6%. So then they look at the BMI. So the mean BMI was 31.2, which is high. You're inkling towards that obese range.
Yeah.
51% of the study had no comorbidities, while 17. So comorbidities are essentially any of those like heart disease, diabetes, any of those things that I named earlier. So half the study didn't have it, which was awesome. 17 had 1, and 31% had 2 or more.
Okay.
Which again is not surprising, given that if we look at kind of the general leading causes of death, or actually I should say the leading causes of preventable death within the United States is heart disease, cancer, respiratory disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, etc. Relatively preventable, that is. Or sorry, not preventable. Those were just leading causes of death. My bad. That was a different thing that I meant to read. Okay, so going back to it. So among all of the patients with COVID-19, 18.6% were hospitalized, 2.4 were admitted to the ICU, and 1.6 died.
Okay. So
numbers were actually pretty decent, which does track largely with kind of the stats that we're seeing from COVID as a whole. It is kind of scary. Like I was looking at it this morning, it's for some reference. And I mean, within the United States, almost 500,000 people have died.
Yeah.
Which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And not in a good way. I don't say that in a good way.
No.
But that number itself is gigantic. But when you also then you also have to look at the size of the United States. And we have, I forget how many people are in here, but a couple 100 million people. We would look at percentage wise.
192, 100. I'll pull that number up for you.
Yeah.
But I agree. Yeah, it's relatively the number is small.
Yeah, and that's not. It's always tough when we're kind of talking about this because it's such a highly charged.
328 million.
So do 328 times, or do 328 divided by point. No, not 0.5.
Times 0.5, right? For percentage, right?
No, hold on.
What were we doing?
Mess that up.
Oh shit.
Do 500,000 divided by, the whatever
328 million.
Yeah. Which I guess it could be 328,000 divided by 500. 0.001%. Yeah. So per 0.001, which would be 0.1%.
0.1%, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is fairly close to what we would be looking at. So 1.6, 1.1, but generally numbers are pretty similar. But to put some context into it, 1.6 of 1.6% of the 48,000 is
still 48.
Yeah, about 40. It's about 48.
50, about 40 to 20,
50, give or take.
77 people,
somewhere around there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still not great that that's the case,
Yeah.
but to put some significance, at least put some note into what these numbers mean. I'm gonna kind of scroll down a little bit past some of these numbers.
Yeah.
But to give some context into kind of the difference. So being consistently inactive resulted in a significantly higher odds for the three outcomes compared with being either consistently meeting the physical activity guidelines or doing some activity.
Oh, wait, we were off. It's not 77. It's 768.
768. Whoops. But carried one zero
One
over
zero
too
too
far.
many.
But being consistently inactive, so this is 0 to 10 minutes of activity through the week, increased the odds of hospitalization by two times.
Jesus.
Compared to consistently meeting the guidelines. So when they're looking at these numbers, in case you're curious, they're measuring it against people who met the 150 minimum or more. So that's kind of what they're basing this off of when we're looking at these numbers. So you have a two times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID or if you didn't do any exercise. Those who were doing some activity, it was about 1.8 times greater. So a decrease a little bit. And so this is kind of one of those things when we're talking about statistical significance is, we are looking at a 0.4 times change from no activity to some activity.
Yeah.
But even though it is that 0.4 change, like kind of what you were just talking about with these overall numbers, if you think about the broad swath of, 200 million people? 328 million people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's tens of thousands of people that could potentially be saved by having some activity in their lives.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yep. So in addition, patients who were consistently inactive had greater odds of being hospitalized than patients who were doing some activity other than age, pregnancy, and a history of organ transplant being consistently inactive. Conferred the highest odds for hospitalization with COVID-19, which we already know, right? We kind of already stated. So there's like a little bit of numbers. Patients who were consistently inactive had 1.7 times greater odds of going to the ICU.
Jesus.
Patients who were doing some activity had a 1.5 chance of going to the ICU. And then patients who were consistently inactive also appear to have a greater odds of being admitted to the ICU than patients who were doing some activity. Yeah, all right. Though this was not statistically significant. Perfect, right? Kind of going again, we're looking at a point just shy of 0.2 change.
Yeah.
So not a huge significance. So then the odds of COVID-19 the odds of death were 2.5 times greater for patients who were consistently inactive compared to patients who were meeting the guidelines. And then patients who were doing some activity had a 1.8 times chance of dying from COVID versus people who were active.
I would say that's a little more significant, being 0.7.
Yeah.
From zero activity to some activity, a 0.7, multiplier is just
yeah.
you're saying, that's thousands of people.
the tens of thousands
of people.
So yeah, the odds for death for consistently inactive patients was robust, and in most instances was higher than the odds of other COVID-19 risk factors.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing to note, is the idea that some of these comorbidities of comorbidities, what we're looking at, like heart disease and blah blah blah. If you were active, or some activity, again, that's like 10 to 149 minutes a week, and you had something else, like some sort of other health condition, the odds were in your favor if you were doing something active, to help your health in some capacity. Brisk walks, for example.
Yeah.
So just kind of give it a note that like that alone, like, and again, this is just within this one study. And as far as I'm aware, there's not a whole lot that can kind of back this up right now. So again, take it with a grain of salt, but to a certain degree. But any activity is literally better than none, especially if you have something else going on, like health wise. This can significantly better your odds.
Yeah.
And that's kind of honestly a lot of really where it kind of goes. It goes into a little bit more about like the guidelines that they were talking about. So for example, U.S. physical activity guidelines established a goal of 150 minutes per week, which we kind of already talked about, to maximize health benefits. This amount could be accrued in small bits, making achievement of the guidelines within reach for nearly all people, which is kind of the point of it. Other studies have shown that on average, Americans have at least 46 hours each day of leisure time, the majority of which is devoted to sedentary activity, particularly electronic media. So sitting on your phones, playing on your computers,
PS5s,
doing all your kids on their computers, doing all their downloading. Throwback. You know what that's from? It's the G.I. Joe PSAs.
Oh, Jesus.
Quit all your downloading. Oh, my God. So many things to show you. But the findings here provide additional rationale and motivation for individuals to be more physically active, as well as for communities to design environments that were more conducive to routine physical activity, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
And that's, to retouch on the sitting and leisure time, right? That's not to say like you can't have leisure time after or before you've done your physical activity, but you got to get your physical activity in.
Yes.
You can't just sit around and play video games all day and like, oh yeah, that was my physical activity. And like, no, get your ass up out of that seat, off the chair, off the couch, go for your brisk walk, then come back and play, Yeah.
Yeah. It's, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. We live in a world that is like everything is trying to grasp our attention and does a really, really good job at it. There's literally data scientists and not environmental. There are environmental scientists. Those are real things. But psychologists and whatnot that look at apps, look at TV programs, and how can you get attention from people? How do you trap people into an ecosystem so that way they stay for longer?
As of recent, we discovered that with Facebook and Instagram, the algorithm has been revealed. We know it exists. That's why we know your phone is listening to your computer is listening to. It's they see your shit, what you search for on your internet database, and they feed it to you.
Yeah. Well, and that's if something is free, you are the product.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's becoming more and more well known, whether or not people are willing to take anything off of that. But yeah, anything that you search online, you sign up for something, that data is logged somewhere. And there is a profile of you that knows you better than you know you.
Yep.
Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But it's crazy. There's some stuff where I was reading about that, Facebook, for example, knows when you're going to go to the bathroom.
No way.
And has can.
Oh, I believe that because you take your phone with you when you take a shit.
Yeah.
You just sit there and you're on your Facebook or your Instagram.
There was a really interesting thing on, I think it was Google or maybe it was Facebook, but it was targeted ads essentially was what it was. And, Target was starting to send out baby clothes and maternity clothes to this house. And so this family that lived there, the dad, daughter for this instance, and the dad was like, the hell?
Yeah.
Like younger girl or younger daughter, so didn't assume anything. And he was like, what the hell? Like, why are we getting maternity stuff?
Yeah.
Well, lo and behold, Target knew that this girl was pregnant before
Oh,
she knew she was pregnant
Shit.
because of stuff that she was searching for.
Pregnancy tests.
Well, not even pregnancy tests,
Oh,
but
wow.
starting to talk about like symptoms that she was having that essentially alluded to the idea of, hey, you're probably pregnant.
Wow.
So they were sending her coupons and like stuff to be like, hey, shop at Target for your baby
That's insane.
that you don't know you have yet.
Yeah, that's insane.
So that's the type of information that people like that not people, but like companies can get on you.
Want to hear some crazy shit?
Let's hear it.
So when I was living with my mom back in like 2019,
19.
probably, I received baby formula from WIC, like formulas, powders, like bottles and shit. And I was like, I wasn't seeing anybody at the time. Like, I was just like, where the fuck did this even come from? And so I had tried to establish contact with WIC and like be like, hey, like, I think you sent this to the wrong person. And they're like, no, congratulations. It's like, you're pregnant. And I was like, I'm a dude. So that's physically impossible for me to do that. And I'm also not seeing anyone at the time. But they're like, oh, that's weird. You know, like somebody, you know, logged you in and said that you know, we were having this and you needed help. And I was like, okay, well, fuck. I mean, here's your stuff. Like, I'll send it back. But it was so weird, right? Like, somehow my information was out there that I was having a kid. I was like, wait, I don't have a girlfriend to have a kid, so I don't know how that happened.
Not that you're aware of.
Yeah, apparently. Shit.
Out there slutting it up.
God.
So back to COVID.
Yeah.
So this is a good part. So it does go into strengths and limitations, which I do enjoy. So the study's main strength is the large number of participants with COVID-19 with assessment of pre-diagnosis physical activity levels. Oh my God.
It's a mouthful.
An additional strength is the demographic diversity of the study sample, including almost 65% of the patients of Hispanic descent. Another important strength is the ability to adjust for a wider range of demographic and health variables that are included in the system. A final strength is the COVID-19 outcome measures were objective and indicative of COVID-19 severity. So, which is awesome too. The main limitations of the study were that the measurements of the physical activity was self-reported, and there's no measure of the intensity of the exercise beyond the threshold of, quote, moderate to strenuous exercise, like a brisk walk.
Yeah.
So though the assessment of physical activity has been previously validated and the use of the three or more measurements allowed for improved estimations of physical activity and the identification of patients with consistently high or low physical activity patterns. So in that sense, all it's just saying is that though the limitation is that it was a self-reported test or study, there were previous numbers to back up what they were trying to get after. So there was something to kind of, again, a leg to stand on in saying, you know, yes, these people self-reported their stuff, but we have like at least 3 to 5 or more self-reported instances of like physical activity, which is nice.
Yeah.
Other limitations include the potential for sparse data in some of the variables. So, for example, I don't know what this one stands for, my bad. But the OR for physical activity and death outcomes in the highest age category resulted in, oh my God, there's so many acronyms in a row. Essentially, the 80 plus age category kind of skewed results a little bit. And so it suggested that there may be a sparse data problem and perhaps for other confounding variables. However, confounder impression does not bias the target estimates. That is, the association of physical activity on severe COVID-19 outcomes. So in addition, some of the confounders are time varying and may be continuously reflect the information recorded during patient interviews. So again, just kind of, it comes back to, this one is talking about just more so like age, the age of the person, as well as like their ability to give information on how much physical activity they had.
Right.
So, summaries. kind of finish it on off.
I guess real quick, that's another limiting factor, right? For the age group as they get older, 70 plus, 80 plus, right? Like they're obviously limited to daily exercise, especially if they're
Potentially
living in their home by themselves. I know for my grandmother, she's living in assisted care, and they make sure she walks at least twice a day for 10 minutes. So I guess, depending on their abilities, that's also a limiting factor on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's definitely, and this is where it gets hard, right? Is there's a lot of ways to kind of look at how to take a study and how, like, there's sometimes where too much of a zoomed in view can negatively affect it.
Yeah.
Where then you get no results whatsoever, or everything is just bullshit.
Yeah.
So, let's see. So kind of going into some of the conclusions. So, when compared with those who reported being consistently inactive and those who were consistently meeting the physical activity guidelines had lower odds of being hospitalized, requiring ICU admission, or dying from COVID-19. Even activity levels that did not meet the guidelines were significantly associated with reduced odds of hospitalization and death. It is noted that being consistently inactive was a stronger risk factor for severe COVID-19 outcomes than any of the underlying medical conditions and risk factors identified by CDC, except for age and a history of organ transplant. In fact, physical inactivity was the strongest risk factor across all outcomes, compared with the commonly cited, quote, modifiable risk factors, including smoking, obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease and cancer. This evidence that physical inactivity is a strong modifiable risk factor for severe COVID-19 contrasts with the limited efforts by U.S. public health authorities to educate the population about the benefits of physical activity related to adverse COVID-19 outcomes, or to systematically promote regular physical activity during the pandemic. We recommend that the public health authorities inform all populations that, short of vaccination and following public health safety guidelines like social distancing and mask use, engaging in regular physical activity may be one of the single most important actions individuals can take to prevent severe COVID-19 and its complications, including death. The message is especially important given the increased barriers to achieve regular physical activity during lockdowns and other pandemic restrictions. The results of the present study suggest a clear and actionable guideline for reducing the risk of severe COVID-19 outcomes. So that's kind of their conclusion and kind of what they kind of glean from the information.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I talked about with my client today when we were kind of talking about what we were talking about today, God, talking a lot, is, and we referenced this before again, callbacks, baby, is in the CrossFit Level 1 book, they talk about this continuum of sickness, wellness, and fitness.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very watered down concept to look at it. But I think it's a very valuable, and so it's so simplistic. It's kind of ridiculous how much it makes sense, and how, in my opinion, accurate this concept is. And so, if you don't remember, or if you've never heard this before, it's think of like a semicircle. And so on the left hand side is sickness, and as you exercise, as you make lifestyle adjustments, nutrition, whatever you're limiting sedentary activities within reason, you start to move up this continuum, you go up this ladder, for example, into what would be considered wellness. And then when you start to move past wellness, where we're looking at more physical activity, we're looking at physiological changes, so lower body fat, looking at muscle mass, looking at cardiovascular health. You start to move into the fitness side, which CrossFit has its own definition of fitness, but that's neither here nor there. And so the idea is that the further that you go into the side of wellness and fitness, if you do have a setback in the sense of you get sick, you have an injury, whatever the case may be, you're going to kind of work your way backwards a little bit, but the further along you are, that backwards isn't that bad. Mm-hmm. So if you're in really great shape, you are, all of the things that are associated with, what good shape would be in, use your imagination. In this instance, you're probably right, is, and this study is kind of backing this concept, is that if you are active and you do get sick, your steps backwards aren't going to be nearly as bad as somebody who is already living in sickness.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really important piece to make note of, is that 120 minutes a day is the absolute bare minimum. And to potentially subvert the severe negative effects that can come from this global pandemic.
Well, not even this global pandemic, but any sickness in reality, like the flu.
True.
I mean, as non-existent as it was last year, it's the biggest virus killer that we face annually, right? Every year we face the flu. And those with stronger immune systems, those who are meeting the minimum criteria, you see them, not bounce back, but they're not down and out. The flu hits us all in different ways. I luckily, knock on wood, within the last 4 years, actually, I think at this point, I've had the flu once where it put me on my ass and I was down for about 48 hours. And I really needed, Kat's help because I was hurting. But prior to that, like the flu would hit me, it'd be a 24-hour bug. I'd be over it. Same with any cold, same with any other like little sickness here and there. I knock on wood. I thank, myself for pushing myself and training, but like that, moving your body, building your immunity, what's it called? Your
immune system.
Immune system. Thank you. Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what you want.
That was the one. Your immune system, it's important, not just for pandemics like this, but just in life.
Yeah. I mean, and this is part of like such a larger discussion, but exactly what you're saying, like it helps out in everything. It helps out in you roll your ankle, right? You trip and fall. Like the strong people are harder to kill.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a big thing to be. And that doesn't mean you have to be like a power lifter.
Yeah.
But, stressing your body in a good way reaps rewards so like on a magnitude that you can't completely comprehend. And again, you look at Eric and I and you hear about some of the workouts and the crazy shit that we do training wise. That's an outlier. Like we are not the norm. And that's not to say that we're better.
Yeah.
But we're not average in that regard. And so, the average is, going to like a group class at your LA Fitness. It could be going for a jog. It could be going for a walk. It could be playing catch with your kids, like running around with your kids. Like these are all that's activity. It's physical activity. And the bare minimum is 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and like something clicked in your mind, I hope that it made a positive change in the idea of like any level of activity is better than no activity.
Yeah.
In the case of this paper, any activity is significantly better than no activity in the sense that your response to sickness, not just COVID, but most sicknesses it's going to serve you so much better.
Yeah.
And potentially live to see another day.
Absolutely. You said what I was on my head right now. I was just like, if what we've read to you, if what we've said to you, over the course of this episode, like if it even, takes something in your head or if it scares you, like good, like take a look at what you're doing for your activity. If you're not meeting the minimum or if you feel you should do more on a weekly basis, that should push you. That should push you to do a little bit more, even a little bit more at a time. We're not saying go all out your first week because obviously a callback. You can't go out your first week. Like welcome back to, open life. Welcome back to some sort of normalcy. Like you can't go gun ho right away. It's got to be baby steps. We've called this back several times. It's got to be baby steps, but at least it's baby steps in the right direction towards fitness versus towards sickness.
Yeah, 100%. Again, I feel like I'm just going to be repeating myself here and there, but it is. It's little goes a very, very long way, and it's hard, right? Like I know for us to sit here and just spew this stuff is very easy for us to say, and we don't know what people's lives are like. We don't know the stresses that go on, and that maybe there are people out there that that don't have the ability to find 20 minutes worth of time. And if that's the case, like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to laugh, but
Maybe check your priorities. Your health should be your priority. A priority.
Definitely a priority.
Yeah.
But I think about stuff like this where, there's some of the, there's a way. I have to believe that there is some way, no matter what. And I think about one of my clients who, this is not a sob story by any means, but so one of my clients, she was having, she came in because she was having some pains when she was trying to exercise. And she was starting up college, and it was like final season and her finals times and all that stuff. And she was like, I'm not going to have any time to be able to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, bullshit. I was like, absolute bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's figure this out right now. And so I figured out a bunch of stuff where she can stand at her desk and still read her books and do her exercises. And I was like, never tell me that there's
not enough time.
No way, or there's not enough time, because that's the excuse for every single person.
Yeah.
I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, but maybe not.
Yeah.
And I believe that there is a way to find 20 minutes of total activity every day to be able to do something.
Yeah.
Something.
I had a similar conversation with not even my athlete, but one of my friend Javi's athletes, Oscar. We were talking about, lifting and the struggles he had working out alone. He told me that he can't do it. It's tougher for him. He finds himself on his phone. He finds himself looking for a distraction versus putting in the work to work out. And I told him, I was like, look, man, like, I love working out by myself. It took a while to get there, but what you have to develop is when you're by yourself, it's only you and you. That means you have to develop you, whether it be physically, mentally, emotionally. You have to work on you, and you have to look at it as positive. You are granted that time by yourself to work on yourself, with, again, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever. And I also told him, I was like, you got to turn your fucking phone off.
Yeah.
You cannot, like me, man, like I get work emails, I get work texts all the fucking time. But when I'm in the gym, that shit, no, I don't answer it. I don't respond to it. Like, leave me the fuck alone. And I told him, I was like, you got to check out to check in. Like, you got to check out of work. You got to check out of all the daily distractions to check yourself in for you time. You have to put aside you time.
Yeah.
And we were talking about it, and like he knew and he understood, but before he left, he was like, "Hey man, thanks for checking me back in. Like, I appreciate it. Like, that's the talk, that's the motivation I kind of needed to get me going and some more." And I was like, anytime, man, anytime you want to just sit and shoot the shit, like, I'd be happy to do it.
Yeah.
But you have to, again, like you said, bullshit. There's no such thing as you don't have time. You make your time.
Yeah.
Your time is more valuable to you than to anyone you know.
Yeah, and you could be creative.
Yeah.
That's kind of the fun part. Like, Marissa gets mad at me sometimes because we'll walk in, and there's either, when you walk in, there's two options. There's the elevator or there's the stairs. And every single time not every single time, but most times I'll usually take the stairs, and I can hear her go, ugh. And I go, fitness is a choice. It's like I audibly will tell her fitness is a choice.
Yeah.
And we'll walk up 3 flights of stairs. But no, to add on to kind of what you were saying, you brought up like motivation. Yeah. And same client from today, she comes in and she goes, "What do you got for me for when my motivation is low?" And I was like, I love the fact that you just said that.
That's a good question.
I was like, this is a perfect question.
Yeah.
And she was like, how do you keep your motivation high? And I was like, that's a trick question. You can't.
Yeah.
I was like, motivation wanes. I'm like, it comes and goes. Some days you want it more than you want the others. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if you remember, I'm not going to go into detail on this part, but I was like, if you remember back to when we were talking about goal setting and you told me, here are the things that you wanted to achieve. And I'm like, and I dug in as to like why you wanted to achieve them. I was like, the goal there is to try and find an emotional reason, right? It's the emotional button. I'm like, that's important for my job to try and get you to stay motivated or to have a goal, essentially. Because if you have something that's really meaningful to you and really powerful for you that you want to achieve, on the days that you wake up and you're like, I feel like trash, I don't want to do anything, you can think back to that emotional trigger that says, okay, I might not be able to do everything that I want to do today, but I'm going to do something.
Yeah.
Because again, if this study says anything, something is better than nothing.
Right. Absolutely.
And I was like, and that's what you need to go back to on the days that you feel crappy.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to work out, you don't want to do this or that or whatever the case may be. Remember your goal, right? And if you need to, listen to our goals episode.
Yeah.
That's like literally everything we talked about.
And then like going back really quick, because the numbers were playing in my head, like how we said, you know, the 0 to 10 minutes was a 2.5 like morbidity rate, right? Or percent morbidity rate. And then the 10 to 149 was a 1.8. We were poking at like the number 0.7%. I did the numbers of the 48, right? The 2.5% was 1,200 people. 1,200 people. And then the 1.7 or 1.8 was 864. That's a difference of 336 lives.
Yeah. And that's only from this study.
That's from this study.
That's not the 300 million people in the United States.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it doesn't seem like a huge number, but if you walk into a gym, look at 336 people.
Yeah.
That will put it in perspective for you that if these people chose not to do something, if they chose to be in the 0 to 10 category and God forbid COVID took over, they'd be dead. Yeah. That's 336 people you would never see again. Potentially, right? It's just crazy what a little more will do for you.
Yeah, it is. But I don't have much more to add on to this without it turning like far more gloomy.
Of course, yeah, and I think, you know, ending it on the lighter side of like, look, we want you guys to be motivated, and if you're having problems with it, please, like Ryan and I, we love talking motivation. We motivate each other in the gym when we can. Like, we'll both have tough days. We'll both be doing the same fucking workout, and like I'll hate it, but he'll yell at me from across the room, or vice versa. Yeah. He's doing the open or qualifiers, and I'm pushing his ass just because like we know we're motivated, we know why we want it, but having that little extra always is that nice kick in the ass. You're like, all right, I've got somebody in my corner who wants me to succeed as much as I want to succeed.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Get a buddy.
Yeah.
Like find somebody to go into the trenches with.
Mm-hmm.
Find a community, find a community that is like-minded in the sense that wants to for betterment. I mean, not to drag on about it, but that's why I love CrossFit, man. Yeah. Like that's the big thing that drew me not drew me to it, but kept me in it.
You're right.
Was the fact that I was in a room full of people with like-minded intentions with the goal of not being sick and trying to be fit.
Yeah.
And all of the lifestyle things that happened with it. I mean, like I said, I told somebody on Wednesday, like CrossFit effectively helps me quit smoking. Like I can't thank it more than every other day when I wake up and I can breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. And then my callback from the beginning was like, CrossFit saved me from morbid obesity. Like,
yeah. So
yeah,
it's a life-changing event.
Absolutely.
For sure. But
absolutely.
Yeah. If you need to, find a friend. Find somebody that will do it with you, because having like an account buddy is really powerful, to be able to kind of push you and have somebody like kind of exactly what Eric was saying. Like on the days where I feel like trash and I don't want to train, I can lean against him a little bit to be like, all right, like he's here, I'm here. Like I'm not gonna be able to do my all, but I'll do something.
Yeah.
And again, better than nothing.
Yeah, and the same thing is vice versa. Like I'll tell Ryan, like I feel like shit. He'll be like, "Come on, let's just move." Like you don't even have to do the RX weight or any prescribed weight. Just come in and move. Like come in and move a bar, move a kettlebell, and then buy like the second workout because we do 8.
Not always.
I'm probably doing what's written down because it's just like fuck. All right, I'm into it. Like let's go.
You kind of like get yourself into it a little bit.
It's not only a physical warm up, but it's a mental warm up. Like you can't on those lazy or tired days. You got to warm up to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, there's also something like there's something to it where like as you're like like we talked about before, like you're there.
Yeah.
So you're like, you know what? Eventually
Yeah.
you'll kind of like the flip will switch and you're like, well, I'm here. Might as well just go for it.
Yeah.
Like, why waste my time?
Yeah.
No, well-
I drove this way. I'm here.
Yeah.
I've got my protein shake ready for the end of this.
I want to drink that.
Yeah.
Side note, I got this like, I don't know if I told you, I got this like mint chocolate chip
I don't think you
protein
told
shake.
me that one yet.
Oh, it is so good.
I'm going to need a scoop of
I
that.
love it. Oh, 100%. I'll 100% give you some. It's so tasty. It's like, oh, it's amazing. All right. Well, anything else you want to add to the end of this?
Nothing related to this. I do have something for a future episode about venting. I picked up something on venting. It's a callback to another thing.
It's been a minute since we've had the venting
It's
series.
been a minute, yeah. But it's something that, I ran into this week and it irked me.
Write it down.
I will write it down,
Yes.
yeah. But it irked the shit out of me.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, get excited. More bitching.
Yeah.
All right. Then, Eric, where can people find us?
You guys can find us at our Instagram at another_rep_podcast, and you can email us at anotherreppodcast@gmail.com.
And you can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit that link tree in that Instagram bio.
Yeah.
Baby.
Baby.
All right. Bye.
Bye.